"You're too tall for me," said the cowboy. The woman standing before Silas Ward didn't flinch. She simply nodded once, turned, and walked away into the dusty afternoon heat. But there was something about the way she carried herself, something that made the other folks in town step aside as she passed, something that made grown men lower their eyes. Silas watched her disappear down the main road, her long shadow stretching behind her like a dark promise. He felt proud of himself for speaking his mind. A rancher like him didn't need complications, especially not with someone who looked different. But as evening fell, strange sounds began echoing across the valley, low, rhythmic drumming that seemed to come from everywhere and nowhere at once. The cattle grew restless. His horses paced nervously in their stalls, ears twitching toward the distant hills. And then Silas saw them, silhouettes moving along the ridgeline, dozens of them, too many to count in the fading light. They weren't approaching, not yet. They were just watching, waiting. The drumming stopped. In the sudden silence, one thought hammered in Silas's mind. What if that woman wasn't just anyone? What if she was someone the entire Apache nation would come looking for? The morning had started like any other at Ward Ranch. Silas checked his cattle, mended a broken fence post, and rode back to town for supplies. The general store was busy with the usual faces: farmers, ranchers, and travelers passing through on their way to bigger settlements. That's when she walked in. She stood nearly a head taller than most men in the store, her long black hair braided down her back, wearing simple clothes that marked her as Apache. But it wasn't just her height that made everyone notice. She moved with a quiet confidence that filled the room, her dark eyes scanning the shelves with purpose. Silas had been examining saddle leather when she approached the counter near him. The store owner, Jeremiah, seemed nervous as she placed coins on the wood surface and pointed to items she needed: flour, salt, dried beans, basic supplies, nothing unusual. "Excuse me," she said to Silas, her voice soft but clear. "I'm looking for work. Someone told me you might need help with your ranch." Silas looked her up and down, taking in her impressive height, her steady gaze. Other customers had grown quiet, watching the exchange. He felt their eyes on him, waiting to see how he'd respond. "You're too tall for me," he said loudly enough for others to hear. "I need workers who can fit through doorways without ducking. Find yourself a circus if you want work." A few men chuckled. The store owner shifted uncomfortably behind his counter. The woman's expression didn't change. She simply nodded once, gathered her supplies, and walked toward the door. But as she passed each person in the store, something strange happened. Men who had been smirking moments before suddenly looked away. Women stepped back, creating a clear path for her. Jeremiah, the store owner, actually removed his hat as she passed, as if showing respect to someone important. Silas noticed this, but dismissed it. Probably just folks being polite to avoid trouble. Indians could be unpredictable after all. The woman paused at the doorway and looked back at Silas. For a moment their eyes met. Hers held no anger, no hurt, just a kind of knowing that made him uncomfortable. Then she was gone, her tall figure disappearing into the afternoon heat. Silas finished his business and rode home, feeling satisfied with himself. He'd made it clear where he stood, his ranch, his rules. He didn't need complications from people who didn't fit in. But as the sun began to set behind the distant mountains, he heard something that made him pause while brushing down his horse. Drums, faint but steady, echoing across the valley from somewhere in the hills. His horse's ears twitched nervously toward the sound. The drumming continued through the night, sometimes loud, sometimes barely audible, like a heartbeat in the darkness. Silas tried to ignore it, telling himself it was just some Apache ceremony miles away, nothing to do with him. But his cattle were restless. They huddled together in the far corner of the pasture, occasionally lifting their heads toward the hills with wide, nervous eyes. His horses paced in the corral, snorting and stamping. By dawn, the drumming had stopped, replaced by an unsettling silence. Silas stepped onto his porch with his morning coffee, scanning the horizon. The valley looked peaceful enough, rolling grassland dotted with mesquite trees, his cattle scattered across the pasture, the familiar outline of distant mesas against the brightening sky. Then he saw movement on the ridge. At first, just a few dark shapes silhouetted against the morning light. But as his eyes adjusted, he realized there were more, many more. They appeared to be on horseback, spaced evenly along the entire length of the ridge that overlooked his ranch. Silas squinted, trying to count them. 20? 30? It was hard to tell from this distance, but they were definitely there, and they were watching his property. A cold knot formed in his stomach. He'd heard stories of Apache raiding parties. Though they'd been peaceful in this territory for years, treaties had been signed, trade agreements were in place. There was no reason for hostility, unless the memory of yesterday's encounter flashed through his mind. The tall woman, the way people in the store had reacted to her, the respect they'd shown even after he'd humiliated her publicly. Silas shook his head. He was being paranoid. One rude comment to a job seeker wouldn't bring an entire war party to his doorstep. That would be insane. But as the morning wore on, the figures remained. They didn't approach, didn't make any threatening gestures. They simply sat on their horses along the ridge, a silent line of watchers that stretched as far as he could see. By midday, Silas's nerves were frayed. He couldn't concentrate on his daily tasks. Every time he looked up, they were still there, waiting. He saddled his horse and rode toward the ridge, his rifle in its scabbard, but his hands deliberately away from it. No need to provoke anything. He'd simply ride up and ask what they wanted. But as he got within a quarter-mile of the slope, one of the riders, a man with an impressive feathered headdress, raised his hand, not in greeting, but in a clear signal to stop. Silas pulled up his horse. Even from this distance he could see more details now. These weren't raiders. They were dressed formally, as if for ceremony. War paint marked their faces in patterns he didn't recognize. Their horses were decorated with symbols and feathers. The man with the headdress called out something in Apache. His voice carried clearly across the distance, though Silas couldn't understand the words. But the tone was unmistakable. It was a question. They were asking him something, and somehow Silas knew it had everything to do with the woman he'd dismissed yesterday. Silas spent the rest of the day watching from his porch, his rifle across his lap. The Apache remained on the ridge, motionless as statues. As evening approached, he noticed something that made his blood run cold. More riders were arriving. They came from different directions, from the north, from the east, from hidden trails he didn't even know existed. Each group took position along various ridges surrounding his ranch, until he realized with growing horror that his property was completely encircled. This wasn't a raiding party. This was something else entirely. As darkness fell, small fires began to appear on the ridges. Not war fires. These were controlled, ceremonial. The flickering lights created a ring around his valley, like stars brought down to earth. Silas barely slept. Every sound made him jump. The wind through the trees, a coyote's distant call, the nervous lowing of his cattle. When he did doze, he dreamed of the tall woman's knowing eyes. Dawn brought a new development. A single rider was approaching his ranch house, moving slowly down the main trail. As the figure drew closer, Silas could see it was an elderly Apache man, unarmed, carrying what appeared to be a white cloth tied to a long staff, a flag of truce. Silas grabbed his rifle and stepped onto his porch but kept the weapon lowered. The old man rode to within speaking distance and dismounted with the careful movements of someone whose joints had seen many seasons. "You are Silas Ward," the man said in clear English. It wasn't a question. "I am. What do you want?" The old man studied him with eyes that seemed to see everything. "Yesterday, you spoke to someone. You told her she was too tall for you." Silas's mouth went dry. So? "So you do not know who she was. Should I?" The old man was quiet for a long moment, as if deciding how much to reveal. "She is Ayana. In your language, this means eternal blossom. She is daughter of Chief Running Bear. She is also—" He paused, choosing his words carefully. "She is promised to marry the son of Chief Ironhawk, whose territory lies beyond the eastern mountains." The implications hit Silas like a physical blow. A chief's daughter, someone promised in marriage to unite two powerful tribes, and he had humiliated her in front of a store full of witnesses. "I didn't know," Silas stammered. "No, you did not know. But ignorance does not erase insult. She came to your people's town in peace, seeking honest work before her marriage ceremony. You made her feel small in front of your people. You made her people feel small." The old man gestured toward the surrounding ridges, where hundreds of warriors waited in the morning light. "Chief Running Bear has called for counsel. Chief Ironhawk has answered. Both tribes now ask, what kind of man speaks so cruelly to a woman who has done nothing wrong? What kind of people allow such disrespect to go unanswered?" Silas looked around at the assembled tribes, finally understanding the magnitude of his mistake. This wasn't about one insult to one person. This was about honor, respect, and the delicate balance that kept the peace in this territory. "What do you want from me?" he asked quietly. The old man looked toward the eastern ridge, where a group of riders was descending toward the ranch. Unlike the others, these warriors wore different markings, red and black paint instead of blue and white. Their horses moved with military precision. "Chief Ironhawk comes now," the old man said. "He wishes to see the man who insulted his future daughter-in-law." Silas felt sweat beading on his forehead, despite the cool morning air. "What does he want?" "That depends on you." The new group of riders reached the ranch house, and Silas immediately recognized their leader. Chief Ironhawk was a man whose reputation stretched across 3 territories, a warrior who had never lost a battle, a negotiator who had prevented countless conflicts through strength and wisdom. He was younger than Silas had expected, perhaps 40 years old, with intelligent eyes that seemed to catalog every detail. Ironhawk dismounted and approached without ceremony. When he spoke, his English was perfect, refined even. "Mr. Ward, I understand you have an opinion about the height of Apache women." There was no anger in his voice, which somehow made it more terrifying than shouting would have been. "Chief Ironhawk, I made a mistake. I didn't know who she was." "You think knowing would have changed your words?" The question hung in the air. Silas realized that saying yes would mean he only showed respect to important people. Saying no would mean he stood by his insult. "I should have been respectful to anyone seeking honest work," Silas said finally. Ironhawk nodded slowly. "Better, but words are wind. What matters is understanding." He gestured to his warriors, then to the hills where Running Bear's tribe waited. "Do you see what your words have cost?" Silas looked around at the hundreds of assembled warriors, the disrupted peace, the fear that now gripped the entire valley. 2 powerful tribes had been forced to respond to his casual cruelty. "I see it," he said quietly. "Good. Now you must decide. We can handle this the old way. Blood for honor, conflict for conflict, or we can find a new way." Ironhawk stepped closer. Ayanna suggested something unusual. She said you might be capable of learning. "Learning what?" "Humility, service, what it means to be small." Ironhawk's eyes held a challenge. She proposed a test. "You work for her people for 30 days. No pay, no special treatment. You do whatever task you are given, no matter how humble. If you complete this with dignity, the insult is forgiven. If you refuse, or fail," he didn't need to finish. The assembled warriors made the consequences clear. "And if I agree, then you learn whether you are truly sorry, or merely afraid." Silas looked at his ranch house, his cattle, his comfortable life. Then he looked at the warriors surrounding him, at the 2 powerful chiefs who could destroy everything he'd built with a single word. But somewhere in his mind, he also saw the tall woman's knowing eyes, her quiet dignity as she'd walked away from his cruelty. "What kind of work?" he asked. Chief Ironhawk smiled, but there was no warmth in it. "You will tend the horses, all of them. You will carry water from the stream to the camp, every barrel needed. You will gather wood for fires, prepare food when asked, clean what needs cleaning. You will do this from sunrise to sunset for 30 days. Silas felt his pride recoil. These were tasks for servants, for children learning responsibility. That's not work for a man. Ayanna did not think height was work for a woman. Ironhawk replied smoothly. Yet you judged her by it. Now you will be judged by how well you can be small. The assembled warriors watched in silence. Silas realized he was trapped between his pride and his survival. Refusing would mean conflict with 2 powerful tribes. Accepting meant 30 days of humiliation. "My ranch," he said weakly. "My cattle need tending. Your neighbor Jeremiah has agreed to watch your animals," the old man interjected. "The store owner felt responsible for allowing your insult to go unchallenged in his establishment. Even Jeremiah had been brought into this. The whole territory would know what Silas had done and what price he was paying." "Do you accept?" Ironhawk asked. Silas looked around at the hundreds of warriors, then back at the 2 chiefs. He thought of his comfortable life, his reputation as a successful rancher, the respect he commanded among the local settlers. All of it meant nothing now. "I accept," he said quietly. Ironhawk nodded to his warriors, who immediately began making preparations. Within minutes, they had gathered Silas's few belongings and saddled his horse. The camp would be established in the valley below his ranch, where both tribes could observe his work. As they rode toward the designated area, Silas found himself beside the old man who had first approached him. "What is your name?" Silas asked. "I am Joseph Crow Feather. I speak for Chief Running Bear when he wishes to speak with your people. Will I see her? Ayanna?" Joseph studied him carefully. "Why do you ask?" "I want to apologize. Properly. Apologies are words. Your 30 days are actions. We will see which speaks louder." They reached the campsite as the sun reached its peak. Immediately, Silas was handed a pair of water buckets and pointed toward a stream a quarter-mile away. The buckets were larger than any he'd ever carried, designed to test endurance rather than efficiency. As he walked toward the water, he could feel hundreds of eyes watching him. Warriors from both tribes had positioned themselves to observe his every move. Some looked curious, others skeptical. A few seemed openly amused at the sight of the proud rancher reduced to manual labor. But it was one pair of eyes he didn't see that troubled him most. Where was Ayanna? The first day nearly broke him. By noon, Silas's back ached from carrying water buckets that seemed to grow heavier with each trip. His hands were raw from gathering firewood, his knees scraped from crawling under horses to check their hooves. Tasks that would normally be shared among several people were given entirely to him. And through it all, the warriors watched. Some offered quiet criticism when he did something incorrectly. The wrong knots for securing loads, inefficient routes to the stream, clumsy handling of the horses. Others simply observed in silence, as if he were an unusual animal they were studying. But Ayanna was nowhere to be seen. As evening approached, Silas was given one final task: preparing the fire pit for the evening meal. His muscles screamed as he arranged stones and kindling, his movements clumsy from exhaustion. That's when she appeared. Ayanna walked into the camp as quietly as she had left the store, her tall frame casting a long shadow in the firelight. She wore traditional dress now, soft leather decorated with beadwork that caught the flame's glow. Her hair was braided with feathers and small ornaments that marked her status. She looked like what she was, the daughter of a chief, a woman of importance and dignity. She glanced at Silas briefly, then spoke to Joseph Crow Feather in Apache. Their conversation was short, but Silas caught the sound of his name mixed with words he didn't understand. Joseph nodded and approached Silas. "Ayanna wishes to know how you find the work." Silas straightened, wiping sweat from his forehead. This was his chance to apologize, to explain himself. "Tell her I'm sorry. Tell her I was wrong and stupid and—" Joseph held up a hand. "She did not ask for apologies. She asked how you find the work." Silas looked at Ayanna, who watched him with the same calm expression she'd worn in the store. No anger, no satisfaction at seeing him humbled, just patient observation. "It's hard," he said honestly. "Harder than I expected. My body hurts, and my pride hurts worse." Joseph translated. Ayanna listened, then responded. "She says this is good. Pain means you are learning something new." "Learning what?" "Another exchange in Apache. She says you are learning what it feels like to be judged as too small for the work given to you. Yesterday, you decided she was too tall for yours. Today, you discover whether you are too small for hers." The words hit him like a physical blow. Silas realized that every task, every difficulty, every moment of exhaustion was designed to mirror what he had done to her. The casual dismissal, the public humiliation, the assumption that appearance determined worth. Ayanna spoke once more to Joseph, then turned to leave. "Wait," Silas called out. "What did she say?" Joseph looked at him for a long moment. "She said that tomorrow the work will be harder. She wants to see if you quit when things become truly difficult, or if you have the strength to continue, even when everything in you wants to stop." As Ayanna disappeared into the darkness beyond the firelight, Silas understood that this wasn't just about 30 days of labor. This was about discovering what kind of man he really was. The second week brought new humiliations. Silas was assigned to help the women prepare meals, work he had always considered beneath him. His clumsy hands struggled with tasks that required delicate precision: grinding corn, weaving baskets, mending torn clothing. The Apache women were patient teachers, but their expectations were high. When Silas ruined a basket by weaving too tightly, he had to start over. When he burned the evening meal by letting the fire grow too hot, he went hungry while preparing a new batch for everyone else. Through it all, Ayanna watched from a distance. Sometimes she would speak quietly to Joseph or one of the other elders, but she never addressed Silas directly. Her presence had become a constant reminder of why he was here. On the 15th day, something changed. Silas was struggling to repair a torn bridle when a young Apache boy approached him. The child couldn't have been more than 8 years old, but he moved with the confident bearing of someone raised among warriors. "You are the man who was rude to Ayanna," the boy said in careful English. "Yes," Silas replied, not looking up from his work. "My father says you are learning to be smaller." "I suppose I am." The boy watched Silas's fumbling attempts at leatherwork for several minutes. Then, without being asked, he knelt beside him and began demonstrating the proper technique. "Like this," the child said patiently. "The leather must bend, not fight." As they worked together, Silas realized something remarkable was happening. This child, who had every reason to see him as an enemy, was treating him with simple kindness. No judgment, no cruelty, just a willingness to help someone who was struggling. "What is your name?" Silas asked. "Little Eagle. Ayanna is my cousin." Silas's hand stilled on the leather. Does she speak of me?" Little Eagle considered this seriously. "She says you are like a horse that has never been broken. Very proud, very strong, but not yet useful. She wonders if you can learn to carry weight without bucking. And what do you think?" The boy studied Silas's work with the critical eye of someone much older. "I think you are trying. That is more than many would do." Over the following days, other members of the tribe began to interact with Silas more naturally, not as an enemy being punished, but as someone genuinely attempting to learn their ways. They corrected his mistakes without mockery, shared techniques that made his work easier, included him in conversations around the evening fire. But it was Ayanna's continued distance that troubled him most. On the 20th day, Silas finally gathered the courage to approach Joseph directly. "Why won't she speak to me?" he asked. Joseph looked up from the arrows he was fletching. "Would you speak to someone who had insulted you so publicly? If they were trying to make amends?" "Yes." "Are you? Or are you simply trying to avoid the consequences of your actions?" The question stopped Silas cold. Was his remorse genuine, or was he just going through the motions to escape punishment? The answer would determine everything. On the 30th day, Silas woke before dawn and completed his final tasks with steady hands and a quiet heart. The water buckets no longer felt impossibly heavy. His fingers moved with practiced skill through the leather work and basket weaving. His back had grown strong from weeks of labor. More importantly, his perspective had changed. As the sun reached its peak, the two chiefs called for assembly. Warriors from both tribes gathered in a large circle, with Silas standing in the center. He looked different now, leaner, weathered, humbled by honest work. Chief Running Bear spoke first in Apache, his words carrying the weight of formal ceremony. Joseph translated for Silas. "He says you have completed the 30 days without complaint or failure. Your work has been acceptable. Your attitude has improved. Your effort has been genuine." Ironhawk stepped forward. "The question now is whether you understand what you have learned." Silas looked around the circle of faces, warriors who had watched his transformation, women who had taught him patience, children who had shown him kindness despite his past cruelty. Finally, his eyes found Ayanna. She stood beside her father, tall and dignified, watching him with the same calm expression she had worn throughout his trial. "I learned that I was wrong," Silas said, his voice carrying clearly in the morning air. "Not just about height, but about judging people before I know them. I learned that honest work has dignity regardless of who does it. I learned that strength isn't about making others feel small. It's about lifting them up." He paused, gathering courage for what came next. "But most of all, I learned that Ayanna was right to walk away from me that day. I wasn't worthy of her consideration, and I'm grateful she had the wisdom to see that." Ayanna stepped forward, speaking for the first time since the trial began. "You spoke of my height as if it were a flaw," she said, her voice clear and strong. "But my height allows me to see farther across the plains, to reach higher branches for fruit, to stand as an equal among the tallest warriors of both our tribes. It is not too much. It is exactly what I am meant to be." She moved closer, until she stood directly in front of him. "Your pride made you small, Silas Ward, but your willingness to learn has allowed you to grow. The question is, will you remember these lessons when you return to your comfortable life?" Silas met her gaze steadily. "I hope so. I hope I'm worthy of what you've taught me." Chief Running Bear spoke again, and Joseph translated. "He says the debt is paid. You are free to return to your ranch." The circle began to disperse, warriors returning to their horses and preparations for departure. But Ayanna remained. There is something else, she said quietly. My people have decided to establish a trading post in this valley. We will need someone who understands both Apache ways and the customs of settlers. Someone who has proven they can learn from their mistakes. She extended her hand, not in supplication as she had weeks ago, but as an equal offering partnership. The work pays well, she said with the faintest smile, and there are no height requirements. Silas looked at her outstretched hand, then up into her dignified face. 30 days ago, he would have seen only differences. Now he saw wisdom, strength, and unexpected grace. He shook her hand firmly. I'd be honored to work with you, he said. And for the first time since this began, Ayanna smiled, not with victory, but with genuine warmth. If you enjoyed this story, click the video on your screen now to watch another unforgettable Western tale, where pride meets justice in ways you never expected. Don't forget to subscribe and consider a super chat to help us keep bringing you more stories like these. Your support means everything to us.